So like you take the research about aggression and violent video games. And if you look at the statistical models and you take how the research as a whole, when you consider things like age and peer delinquency and previous exposure to violence and all of those other things, low frustration tolerance, people who get mad really quickly, all those things have far greater effect and the effects of media are gone. Is this making us antisocial? Are there long-term social repercussions to playing online games specifically? Because like you said, if I play loads of board games, people aren't concerned, but all of a sudden you put it in a digital space with virtual friends and it becomes a whole different dynamic, at least perceptually.
On the podcast today, everybody, I am joined by Dr. Rachel Kowert. I have just off camera, well, actually on camera in front of the stream, but off podcast, just completely fanboyed out because this is a person whose work I am very interested in. And I'm just going to be hopefully sitting here listening attentively for the entire interview. Dr. Rachel, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful day here in Ottawa. There's lots of snow on the ground and it's nice to be inside in the warmth, having a chat.
Amazing. So before we get into our topic today, which is we're kind of going to be using is gaming making us antisocial? And obviously we kind of mean video gaming in this respect, because I guess people are like, no, playing board games with your friend totally is not making us antisocial. Totally. Give us a little intro to you and your work.
Sure. I am a research psychologist. I am the research director of Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit that works with the gaming industry and gaming communities. I have been studying games and gamers for more than 10 years, specifically focused on the impact of games. So how games impact us physically, socially, and psychologically. I also have a YouTube channel, Zeitgeist, where I talk about the science of games in a way that hopefully aims to be understandable and relatable to non-scientific audiences. I also have 3 children who are all home right now. So sorry in advance for that. It's totally fine.
As I said to you before, I'm a parent myself, so I know what the last couple of years have been particularly interesting in terms of the interruptions. In fact, the first year for me, both of mine were quite good with their homeschool in the fact that they did it very early in the day. And then would turn up at my door just being like, I'm bored. And well, I have potentially undiagnosed ADHD, which means that if I get interrupted, I don't lose 5 seconds, I lose 3 hours, which was an interesting one to navigate for a while. Yes, but
for sure, yeah. Hard.
So this particular topic was indeed the topic of your thesis. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the social impacts of games.
Yeah. What was it that led you to choose that?
So I always wanted a career in psychology. And if you want a career in psychology, you need a graduate degree, pretty much for sure. So I went to get my master's in counseling psychology to become a therapist at Santa Clara University in California. And early on, I realized I did not want to actually be a therapist, but my passions instead were with research. But I completed the program because I knew having this perspective and completing this program would make me a better researcher and better able to provide this information for mental health practitioners. And during that program, you do an internship where you're doing therapy, obviously. And I saw parent after parent after parent very, very concerned about the social impact of World of Warcraft at the time, because this was height World of Warcraft time. Yeah. And a lot of the concerns were about the social impact. Is this making my child antisocial? And full disclosure, at the time, I was playing loads of World of Warcraft, loads. And I was like, okay, this is like the 3rd, 4th person who came in here and told me this. Now I'm concerned for my own well-being. Should I be concerned? These parents are very concerned. So at the time, that wasn't really researched. Excuse me. Swallow ground. At the time, that wasn't really researched. And so that's when I went to get a research-based PhD looking into, is this making us antisocial? Are there long-term social repercussions to playing online games specifically? Because like you said, if I play loads of board games, people aren't concerned, but all of a sudden you put it in a digital space with virtual friends and it becomes a whole different dynamic, at least perceptually.
Yes. Yeah, well, absolutely, 100%. And I often think there's a kind of oldish, I say it's an old meme, the actual first photo of it's very, very old of people in a Victorian train carriage where every single person's got the broadsheet paper open. And it's like, okay, it's like, so the ability to, I think antisocial is a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a leading term, because it's like, actually, is it just, the person just wants their downtime at that particular moment? That person on the train wanted something to entertain. They didn't want to just assume that the next person to them would be a fellow extrovert that would want to kind of sit there and chat the whole journey away.
I don't want to chat with people on the train.
No.
Generally speaking.
I don't know why I run a talk show and just sit here talking to people for hours, because I'm like so antisocial. Well, I'm so select. I basically just need to recharge my social battery. I mean, I'm introverted, masquerading as an extrovert. I'm just, a little bit of a hyperactive introvert is the easiest way to describe it. So in terms of kind of like looking into this research, what was the way in which you were kind of trying to gather this data? Because I can imagine, like, obviously we hear everything we hear to start off with is all anecdotal. And how do we get from the anecdotal evidence of people saying, well, yes, my child never comes out of their room, or no, my child has more friends on World of Warcraft than they ever had in the real world? How do we get from that to the actual data?
It's a multifaceted kind of approach, because one aspect of it is debunking the idea that games are antisocial to begin with. I think a lot of parents see their children at a screen with headphones on, and they don't realize they're engaged in a world with hundreds or even thousands of other people. So step one is really realizing, like, games are highly social spaces. And then the second step, at least for my thesis, was to look at what is the relationship between playing these games and social skills? So, like, your actual ability, when we break it down into, I broke it down into 6 different facets of skills. So it's like the ability to verbally engage, the ability to read nonverbal cues, the ability to give nonverbal cues. Like, over time, are we seeing any differences, both among game players over time, but also between people who play online games, people who play offline games, so people who like co-play but still digitally, and people who don't play games at all. And full disclosure, I went in expecting to say, yes, absolutely. Like, there was so much concern and so much discussion about this. Not that I thought that my own skills had atrophied, but people were so concerned that this was a thing. I was like, surely I'm going to find that this is a thing. And it's surprising me, but not now, really looking back, there's not really social differences between people who play games and don't. And I think part of that is because games are highly social and our online relationships are very fluid. Like, it's not so common to have only online friends or only offline friends. You have them at conferences, you see them, or you invite people long-term WoW guildies to your wedding. And like, these relationships are really dynamic. So I think a lot of it is just about changing the perspective about how we see what role these games are playing socially in our lives, and then getting that information to parents somehow.
Did you find anything with the sort of the reverse kind of relationship? So instead of kind of games making a person antisocial or like lowering their social skills, as a person with lower social skills would be more kind of prone to actually play games. Did you find anything like that at all?
Great question. The only evidence that I found in the 4 years of my research for my thesis was that people who are more shy, so they were lower in like social expressivity, which is associated with shyness, were more likely to play. So that is kind of the growing and kind of agreed upon, hypothesis that we have now, is that there may be pre-existing social difference between people who are attracted to engage more than people who aren't. But it's not just necessarily shyness or low social skills. It could be people who are geographically isolated. It could be, I moved to a new town. I don't know anybody here. So now I'm playing more because my WoW community, and I've talked about this on Zeitgeist before, when I moved from Texas to California, I didn't know anyone in California, but my WoW community came with me. And I definitely engaged more with them socially during that time than I did previously. So yeah, I do think there's something to be said about personality types or environmental circumstances contributing more to the amount that we engage than the other way around.
One of my questions was going to be like, what was something surprising you found from your research? But I guess you've already kind of touched on
it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You already answered that because you obviously. I find it. I like the fact that I like the fact that you actually, despite being a WoW player yourself, went in with the opposite bias. I quite like that. You were expecting to find it, even though obviously you probably know from yourself, well, it doesn't make me antisocial. Therefore, I'm with my focus group of one.
Exactly.
Therefore, that's the research done. Were there any other kind of surprising turns when you were doing all this research?
I mean, I would say generally speaking, I was surprised, that media effects are so small, just like broadly across the board. The way that media affects our thoughts, our behaviors, our attitudes is really very small. So like you take the research about aggression and violent video games. And if you look at the statistical models and you take how the research as a whole, when you consider things like age and peer delinquency and previous exposure to violence and all of those other things, low frustration tolerance, people who get mad really quickly, all those things have far greater effect and the effects of media are gone. So we have all these discussions, like when something terrible happens in America, when there's a school shooting, it's always, it's the video games. Well, the impact of video games on our behavior is like basically nothing. And that was really surprising, especially because we still have the same debates, like 50 years later. We've been studying video games for so long, decades. And the common idea is still that they have some kind of grip on our behavior and our thoughts. And it's just not true.
Yeah. So this question is something that I think a lot of people have a very visceral emotional reaction to one way or another. And usually that comes down to their own biases. It's more likely that gamers, I mean, we're broadcasting this over Twitch as we speak. So, most people over here are gamers. So we'd all be like, no, we're not only are we sociable in our games, but we're here talking to other people that play games. How more sociable do you want us to get versus, I suppose, again, older generations or maybe the parents of a child that is quite introverted and actually prefers to engage through a virtual world rather than the real world. If you've put this research out there and you've put ultimately kind of the conclusion being no, they don't, has that been met with a lot of backlash?
I did an interview a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, on live French television, which was very interesting. And it was me, and it was someone who runs an esports club, and it was a parent. And the parent kept saying games are addicting. And at some point, like 15 minutes in, I was just like, I just want to make the point to say that people use the word addiction in a very different way that mental health practitioners use the word addiction and this, that, and the other thing. And, there's no evidence that games are addicting. So it just, it's not addicting, it's engaging, whatever. And then the look I got when I watched the playback, because I couldn't see them when I was speaking, there was definitely pushback, and they continued to use the word addiction the entire rest of the interview. So I think that it's really hard to change the minds of people who just have it set. People like easy solutions to complex problems.
Yeah.
My child is not doing X, it must be Y. Yeah. So it is an uphill, difficult battle. And that's why I thought like shows like this and podcasts and YouTube, the stuff I do on YouTube, the idea is to make it more accessible with the thought that if you can see the numbers, if you can see the research, if you can see hundreds of thousands of studies have been done looking at these different things, maybe the evidence will further drive change than just like listening to me talk on my soapbox,
Yeah. Yeah. I do find it quite interesting. And the reason I went with quite an emotional, visceral reaction is I've been explaining to my audience the whole concept of the Dunning-Kruger effect for a few weeks and stuff. And the idea that someone who knows a little bit suddenly has the confidence to act as if they know absolutely everything. And in reality, when you get someone like yourself who's done more research on this, you're more likely to use uncertain language, like the research suggests like this, whereas the person that's like high on the confidence is like, no, people are definitely addicted. And
100%. That's why imposter syndrome is a sign that you're doing something right.
yeah, exactly. You've got more doubt than the person who knows less than you. I actually find it I find it quite as an issue in certain conversations where if someone does that, even though I know that that's there, if someone goes in completely certain about something and I've not got me backup research or anything to call on, I'll suddenly start like doubting myself and be like, right, well, and the annoying thing is I probably actually do know more than that person does, but hey, but that's the thing, is that often, like, obviously we look at people, even when you show a person that's in that sort of almost zealot like level, like research, it's just like, no, this doesn't sit right with what I believe, therefore it's that. And I thought you might come up against that, because you are probably, when you're dealing with something this is something that people have a very visceral reaction to, particularly parents. Let's face it, we you want to know what it's like to feel fully defensive, have kids. It's like, because I was way more defensive of them than I ever have been of myself. And so this person was using the phrase addiction. Is like, what? So you say it's not addicting, it's engaging. What if that feeling? Because anecdotally, I've felt that thing where I just cannot get off certain games, and I really want to play a game until I'm totally and utterly done with it, which is usually annoyingly before I finish it. But it's like, I'm like, oh, I'm never going to get bored of this game, and like I just want to be on it, and like I'll go and try and do other things, and my brain will like keep on like clawing me back to that game. What if that's not addiction? What is the correct word for it?
Yeah. I mean, how much time do you have, Dave? No. So addiction is a psychological, clinical term that's used to diagnose and treat. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the evidence about games and the way that people use games, some people do use games in ways that are problematic. They use them in ways that lead them to not fulfill their occupational requirements, to not go to school, to not eat correctly. There are people who use games problematically, but the evidence suggests it's not the game itself, it's something else pushing that behavior. So They're using games as a maladaptive coping strategy for stress or depression or anxiety, whatever. Yep. The fact that you still think about the games in the back of your mind means that it is a well-designed game that is meant to keep you engaged. I mean, well-designed games put you in a state of flow, which is when the challenge of the game meets the skill of the player. And that's when you lose kind of track of time and space. It's me when I sit down to play The Sims for 5 minutes and I'm playing it for 5 hours.
I don't play that anymore.
The Sims sucks you right in, man.
And WoW very much did for me as well.
Well, I played it for years. I played World of Warcraft. And, even then it was already kind of past a little past the height of it. But for me, like World of Warcraft is a great example. It's not a particularly groundbreaking in graphics or style or daily quests and grinding. Like there's some things about it that aren't very exciting. But for me, it was the social community, right, that kept me back. Yeah, I wanted to play WoW, and I wanted to raid, not because I really cared, but I really loved the idea of getting with 20 friends who I knew, who I loved, and doing something together and having that sense of accomplishment. And so that's a well-designed, that's a well-designed game.
Yeah. 100%. I want to ask you a question about, and again, another sort of a personal experience. So speaking of World of Warcraft, the very first, I played World of Warcraft PvE for a long time. So just quests, just, killing a million boars, like in the South Park joke. It's like just going out there, grinding, killing boars, all the rest of that. And I used to find it to be quite a relaxing, enjoyable, passive game, and just enjoyed it. Then one day, a friend's like, "Let's go and do this PvP arena," and we go into Warsong Gulch for the first time. I've never felt such an adrenaline spike in my whole life as to that. And again, that was something that, like, I was completely different reason for why I wanted to be on the game at that point. Is there anything like psychological there between the difference between PvP and PvE?
Oh, definitely. Different motivations keep us engaged. Some people like to just explore and go around, and some people like to role play. And some people only do the PvP, right? They just really like that head-to-head competition. I remember when like 1v1s or 2v2s would happen. That was not my thing. I just like to... I was on a role-playing server, and I did not have anything to do with that. But people dedicated hours upon hours upon hours to do that and to be good at it. At the end of the day, games kind of fulfill, three big buckets: a sense of achievement, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of autonomy. We're free to choose what it is we want to do. But our fluctuations in what kind of drives us in the moment can absolutely change, whether it's, I didn't know I liked that this capture the flag part of the game, but I still enjoy, killing boars or grinding through Gadget Zan. That is like those levels in Gadget Zan. Oh my God, I was there forever. So there is different psychological mechanisms that go beyond it. But at the end of the day, it's all kind of like the same, right? We all want a sense of accomplishment. We all want a sense of relatedness, and we all want a sense of autonomy, freedom to choose what it is we're doing. But there's just whole different ways of doing that, which is why MMOs are so kind of cool, because you can fulfill all these different things in one environment, one space.
Yeah. So far we've basically talked primarily about MMOs, which for anyone who's listened to the podcast, which means massively multiplayer online. And so how does this fit in when you play something like a competitive FPM first-person shooter, something like and we are going to dip into the realms of toxicity, hopefully, with all this. How does kind of like the genre of the game and the type of game change the sort of expectation on kind of a person's social level or social skills or the way people engage?
Yeah, different genres do have different abilities to promote different things. So like FPS, right? That's going to be more competitive. You still have the social element. You're still usually on a team of some kind. I don't play first person shooters. I don't like the pressure. I talk to my husband about this all the time. He loves GTA games. Yeah. And I love watching him play GTA games, because if I get more than 2 stars from the police, I am done. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm driving into buildings. I'm so stressed. Like, I just can't handle it. But for him, he thrives on it and he finds it to be fun. And maybe he also gets an adrenaline rush. So people will gravitate towards different genres. I very much gravitate to turn-based role-playing games. I like the story. I like being immersed. I like having time to make my decisions. I was upset when Final Fantasy changed the dynamic away from turn-based and more in real time, but I adjusted.
Yeah, me too. I haven't played one since then.
I adjusted. But 6 is still the best, and that was still when I could have time to decide what item I want to use. So there is definitely variation in terms of genre preferences, which is why we have our preferences, which is why some people like me are always like, if I can only pick one genre to play for the rest of my life, it will be RPGs. Do I like other games? Like, yeah, I love SimCity. I love strategy games and that sort of thing too. But that's kind of like the sweet spot for me. So definitely. Are you a GTA? I see you laugh. I hate running from the police.
No, I just thought that you can't even steal a tank until you're at least 4 stars. So, or is it maybe even 5 stars?
Well, that's true.
I'm like, that's the whole reason to get your stars up, is because eventually you can steal a tank. So, no, I play basically everything. I'm one of those people that when they say, "What's your favorite music?" I'm like, weirdly, I've got. And I think this is all down to being the kid that was picked on school and picked last for sports. I was basically, so football, obviously the English version, the one where the ball is hit with the foot. I was putting goal. I was putting goal all the time, and pick last, put in goal, and I really gravitated towards solo games because apart from GoldenEye on the N64, which was like that, I don't think gaming will ever get any better for me than that, because we finished school at 2:10 on a Friday, which was like an hour and a half before every other school finished. And so me and my friends would go back, and everyone would take their controllers into school that day, and we play GoldenEye at my house, and it'd obviously be taking turns. There'd be like 6 or 8 of us there, and we'd basically filter around. And I think that was the pinnacle of kind of that. And then we had I was in a clan on COD Black Ops 2. So, but other than that, I was always playing solo stuff, and I think it was always because I never liked to even ask other people to game. I've got the game It Takes Two, which I bought to play with my brother-in-law, and I've still not even asked him to play it. That's how bad I am. So when other people ask me to go and play games, it's like such a big honor for me. And it's like, but I'd never ask other people. I always liked games that I could play completely and utterly solo. And then it wasn't until the first online one I played was Unreal Tournament. And then I went over to Star Wars Galaxies, City of Heroes, and then WoW. And then WoW was the one that I got hooked on for a very long time, and did sink hours, if not, well, days, literally days. I hated the whole
Definitely
playtime
days.
thing on there because
no,
it's
don't
like
ever do that.
it's like I did not need to know this, and then I stopped playing for a while, and then just went to kind of like playing again, going back to playing solo stuff. And I never interested in any of the Call of Duty games whatsoever because I didn't like the campaigns on any of them except for Modern Warfare. And I was only playing campaigns. So, and then a friend was like, with Black Ops 2 came out, he was like, come on, just play this. And I'm like, well, what's the campaign like? He's like, you don't play for the campaign, we play for multiplayer. And I'm like, why would you just want to play on the same maps over and over? And again, hours, days of life disappeared. So yeah, and now I speedrun things like Celeste and Hades now, because
nice.
I quite like when you said before actually that that flow state, the level of kind of competency matches the level of difficulty. Like if I can, that's when I feel good. Is if I can speedrun a game without, I couldn't do it like on things like I watched someone doing a video of the speedrun in The Hobbit on the GameCube, and it's like, you know, the amount and all the hacks they have to do to get it from a 6-hour game down to a 40-minute game, and I'm just like, no hacks, just like not. I don't want to spend 6 days of my life learning one level, but anything where I can actually again feel a little bit like that flow state. It's important, but it's kind of like what you said about that slow state before. It made me think back, and what you said is the person, it's not necessarily the game. The game is the game is how that person is choosing to actually scratch that itch. You know, that's not what the itch that needs to be scratched is actually what we need to look at here. And again, I was at the age of 6, long before gaming. You know, we had an Atari 2600 somewhere at that point, but is I taught myself to play the piano, and I would be sat on this Casio keyboard from the 80s, like just playing for hours and hours and hours, and nobody ever would turn around and be like, you know, is he on that keyboard again or whatever? Or I was reading like, you know, the Secret 7 Famous 5 books by Enid Blyton or whatever, and no one would be like, he's got too. I mean, I know we do have that. Some people have their face in the books too much, but it was like I was always finding a way to cope or to comfort or to do things, and then video games just became that thing. So it's I think again it's like it's weird how we choose various things and label them as bad. If you were to walk into a cafe and a friend was sat there with a book just reading the book, you wouldn't be like, oh, they can't have a spare moment where they just sat with their thoughts, or they've got to be engaged 100% of the time. You'd be like, oh, my friend's chilling out in the cafe reading a book. And when someone has a phone as well, you immediately assume they're doom scrolling, which is probably statistically quite safe actually. but you immediately assume that the person's just doom scrolling and just wasting their time, when in reality they could be doing something. They could be reading a book on there. You know, it's they could be reading an article on there.
Exactly. And this, speaking of that French interview that I did, I made the same point about how I binge watched the first season of The Witcher in like one session, basically. And nobody had a problem with
influencer.
That. I am a Cavill influencer. But I did, it's official, people. It's on my Twitter. It's been verified by Netflix. I did in one sitting, and nobody says anything. Nobody blinks an eye. And I mentioned this in that live interview, and I said, but if I spent the same 8 hours playing Final Fantasy, people would say something's wrong with you. And the guy was like, basically, it's like, you're going to tell me that your personality hasn't changed. Like after that 8 hours, like, how are you? Like, are you able to socially function? That's really what he asked. And I was like, well, my back would probably hurt because I'm in my late 30s. But other than that, I'd be fine. You know, it's the perception of it being somehow worse, when in reality, it's probably better in terms of psychological outcomes. I'm being active. I'm learning resource management. I'm socializing. I'm, whatever it is I'm doing when I play this game is far more active. Although no Henry Cavill in that one, so maybe it's not better. But
no, I mean, you could have gone with the direct comparison of watching The Witcher versus playing The Witcher.
Versus playing The Witcher.
Although watching The Witcher is definitely a more enjoyable experience. Sorry, any Witcher fans out there. Witcher 3. That was one of the first games I ever played on stream, and that's why I don't game on stream anymore, because I can't talk mental health and game at the same time. I just can't do it. But yeah, the interesting thing about that is, like, people often when a kind of if drugs or alcohol and stuff come up in conversation, there's always that sort of metaphor that Not only alcohol is actually the only drug that you are socially encouraged to do, and binge watching now is actually something that we are socially encouraged to do. Like
so
people,
weird, right?
yeah, it's like that. That's like, again, that's spending 6 hours of your weekend. I'm still only on the end of episode 4 of season 1 on The Witcher, because I only ever watch it. And I only ever watch it when I'm on the cross trainer at the gym, and I only do the cross trainer for half an hour twice a week. So I watch one episode a week, which is problematic for me because there's a very big obstacle in the way of me watching The Witcher season 2, which is The Witcher season 1.
Yeah.
But the thing is, binge watching it's encouraged. So like when Squid Game first came out, everyone was like, you've got to watch it, and it's almost like you've got to watch it before spoilers. There's the threat of spoilers is always looming, so people binge watch it. And like people like my eldest son, there's a Ricky Gervais show called Afterlife. I don't know if you have it over in Canada. Ottawa's Canada, right?
Yes.
My geography's okay. There we go.
You're correct.
But it's like he was saying, like last week, he's like, it's coming out on Friday night, so he's already planning to binge watch it. And if he has like 3 shows come out on the same day, he'll already figure out what time he's got to go to sleep. And that's normal for his friends. Weirdly, actually, if he said to me, I'm going to stay up till 2 a.m. to watch this show, I've got to admit that if he said the exact same to me, to say I'm going to stay up till 2 a.m. to play GTA, I'd probably, again, have my own little emotional reaction to that, which is, there's a bias
in
there.
Society. Like that reaction that you have, even though you know about games, it's so hard to just change that reaction, that there's just something about it. But what's so weird to me, and I went to a conference, oh my God, this was 2015, maybe 2016, long time ago. And I saw a talk on binge watching, and my exact comments, that's when the term had like first kind of picked up speed, was binging is not a good thing. Like the word binging is very negative, but we say binge watching like it's cool. Let's watch Squid Game. So it's not ruined, especially Squid Game. That was not a fun watch. I mean, it was a good show, but
I couldn't stop watching it.
Yeah, me either.
It was convenient that I'd run a marathon the day before with like 0 prep, so I was in agony, so I couldn't get off the couch anyway, so that's my excuse. But I watched all of that, and then ended up watching all of Alice in Borderland, because basically my Netflix was like, you like Asian shows, and I was like, actually, you're not wrong. So there was a lot of. But yeah, binge watching, it's encouraged. The same as like, if you say to someone, I just watch a show once every now and then, people are like, what's wrong with you? Same as like if you say to someone, I don't drink, people are like, what's wrong with you? It's like, and again,
but if you said I binge drink, they would say, what's wrong with you?
Well, I'm British, so that's kind of expected of us.
That's just part of it.
We don't moderate in that stuff. We have a drink or don't. It's like, but no, yeah, it is right. But it's interesting how, again, those exact same 6 hours versus it's people seem to have this hierarchy of what you're spending your time doing. And one thing that I found quite interesting about it is the fact that is people talk about like shortened attention spans and how people won't really engage in things, and now kind of social media and stuff is making us that way. But then if someone is binge watching something, then surely that's kind of flying in the face of that. If binge watching is up, then that was something that never really existed when we were younger. We had to get like a box set of VHSs to if we wanted to like binge watch the season of Friends or whatever it might be. It's like so yeah, I found it really interesting, again, that we have all of these assumptions of what is actually going on without really, again, mostly based on anecdotal things and mostly based on our own experiences and such. So going back to the kind of the FPS thing, what I wanted to touch on with that really was that, first person shooters have got are renowned, and certain games, particularly within that genre, are renowned for having like toxicity in chat and for having basically people just be horrendous to other people. So what is it? What is it about games that can? Again, do you think it's the game's bringing that out in the person, or do you think it's a little bit like the jock would go towards football, not football would call the jock?
Yeah, that's a big question. When it comes to toxicity in games, some of it is gaming culture. Some of it is the idea that you can kind of be a bit of a dick and it's like funny, like teabagging. I mean, it's not funny.
Yeah.
Or, you're a noob, but like, trash talking. Like some of that is really ingrained in gaming culture. Some of it too is built on just discrimination towards people who don't fit the mold, right? So gaming has long been a cis heterosexual white male thing, and anyone who is not in that mold is out. And not that it's been their thing, it's been stereotypically their thing. So if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're not heterosexual, toxicity gets thrown your way. And some of it, again, is like, oh, it's just part of gaming culture. It's online. It doesn't matter. I mean, it very much does and can have real world mental health repercussions. It's not, as we talked about earlier, things don't just exist on the internet and they and don't go out into other aspects of our lives. What makes FPS more male dominated, perhaps. The competitive nature of the game, perhaps, can increase frustration and lower your tolerance for frustration. Those would probably be my two guesses off the top. But, toxicity and dark participation, as I like to call it more generally, exists in all games. Some more moderated than others. I do know of, I don't want to name names, but I have given talks before to esports groups like high schoolers and younger, and they'll be like, we won't play game X because game X is notoriously bad and nobody does anything about it. And it's just like a terrible place to be. And it's particularly the case with women going into male dominated genres and spaces. So yeah,
it's totally
no
Apex,
good.
isn't it?
I'm not going to name it.
Well, nice poker face. Yeah.
I don't play poker. There's a reason.
Yeah. So you say obviously it exists in kind of like in all games. So like if we were to then bring that sort of back into the real world, and again like looking at something say like people playing tabletop RPGs, so playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, like has that toxicity or that dark participation kind of always existed there?
Dungeons and Dragons is an interesting beast. Because I play Dungeons and Dragons, and the people in my campaign are people that I didn't know very well when I started, but I know very well now. And I can't imagine them ever saying anything horrific and mean to me. Because, I feel like that bubble is really built on like trust and like mutual respect and consideration for each other. I think that this toxicity, dark participation has always existed on the internet. That was an aspect that I didn't mention in my previous tangent.
Right.
You also have the element of visual anonymity. You can't see my face. Perhaps actual anonymity if your screen name is Zeitgeist, right? It's not Rachel. Like they don't know that it's me. And that does reduce inhibitions because you don't see the consequences of your action. So that's why a lot of campaigns about cyberbullying and stuff is really about drawing attention to the fact that your actions have real world repercussions. There's an actual person on the other side of that avatar and you're calling them horrible names. It's not something that doesn't impact the person on the other end of it. So I think it hasn't always existed in games because I find the tabletop community to be incredibly wholesome and wonderful. Like everyone I've ever met in the tabletop community is just like a most wonderful person and beacon of light and love. And games and digital games on the internet, not so much.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'm just going to go through a quick question from chat actually, which is saying, when my son is playing multiplayer, usually Star Wars, his rage level goes through the roof when it doesn't go his way, etc. I have actually jumped out of my skin on many occasions with the amount of rage. Then he plays a single player game with amazing detailed graphics and a mission, etc. He's totally engaged and happy. So I asked him why so ragey. He says because in real life he feels his life isn't going well, and when players mess up in the game, he gets frustrated. He cannot control that. And as you think, again, there's like, especially even squad-based things, it's like not just getting ragey with someone else, like on the opposite team, but getting ragey with people that are actually on your team. Like, I'm doing so well here and the team's always losing kind of thing. I played America's Army for a while. And I was definitely the weak link on the team because I don't like first
person shooters. And from personal experience, I broke at least 3 mice from slamming, from dying. Like I would get so frustrated when someone would like get me with the frag grenade and just hit my mouse and it would break. Very frustrated. So I understand this parent's question because I don't have that reaction when I play Legend of Zelda, for instance. So yeah,
not even when "Hey, listen" keeps going on.
Not even then. It's an interesting point because when we talk about violent video games or shooter games making someone aggressive, the example is often that, but the question, the parent hits it on the head. It's actually not aggression, it's frustration.
Yes.
And the frustration is coming out that way. And it can be frustration with yourself. It can be frustration with the other people on the team. It could be frustration with losing a Fortnite match. But it is an important semantic difference to understand that it isn't anger and rage, but it's frustration coming out that way. So yeah, it's hard to witness as a parent, I'm sure, but I'm glad that they're also playing other genres to kind of like chill themselves
I remember running the super scientific and completely and utterly peer-reviewed thing called a Twitter poll once on the question of would you rather be the top player on the losing team or the bottom player on the winning team? And it was very close to 50-50. Yeah, it was very close to 50-50. I am in camp. I would rather be the top player on the losing team. And I think that again comes down to what is my clear goal, as we already seen with this, and why I'm attracted towards speedrunning and in single player games and stuff. And where basically is that I'm in control in a single player game. I don't need a team to kind of do that. But I'm like, I'd rather know that I'm playing well that day. Like I'm not really bothered about the win. I'm not if it was in a competitive esports team, obviously you'd probably rather be on the bottom end of the winning team. But I'm not really bothered about the win. I'm bothered about how well I'm playing, because how well I'm playing actually dictates how much I enjoy the game.
So if we look at the matrix of motivations that keep us in games, you would be more on the competence than the achievement, right? Because you want that sense that you're competent at what you're doing, and if you win. Maybe it
my Xbox gamer score might suggest I'm very much an achievement hunter. Like,
you're a completionist. I feel.
Yeah, I am a completionist, except for until I'm not, and that's one big issue. As I say, it's like again potentially an ADHD thing. It's like completely not a hyper fixation. But I will open up the achievement list on a game at the beginning. So like, especially like because it was like that like when I was playing Mass Effect, for example. There was achievements for using different weaponry, and most people when they play Mass Effect, they're like, right, I like assault rifles and that's what I'm doing. Meanwhile, I'm like swapping weapons all the time so that I can get me 300 kills with an assault rifle. And that was the bad thing about me in Call of Duty, was trying to win all those calling cards, like the number of headshots, golden weapons, diamond weapons, like that became an obsession until the moment it didn't, and then I just completely stopped. And it's just like it's never been a kind of slow peter out with me in a game. It's been like, I'm never going to stop loving this game. It's amazing, and the next thing I know, gone. Never play it anymore. But yeah, so I saw from one of your tweets a few days ago that you were kind of looking at looking at in the future, looking into sort of virtual reality, and how was it about self-image and stuff in terms of that, or that you were talking about?
Yeah, well, it was about the thing I tweeted the other day is a Wall Street Journal panel that I'm doing in a couple of weeks about bullying,
right,
in the metaverse, and what's kind of more generally what will be the mental health impacts on younger people, like 8 to 15, 8 to 16. In this theoretical, fully accessible, Ready Player One style metaverse.
Yeah.
That we don't have with technology yet.
do you have any early thoughts on that?
I mean, I find these questions always come up a lot, and they're really interesting to like think about what it's like, what it's going to be like in the future. For me, kind of my baseline and what I always go back to is the idea that our brains are really good at differentiating reality from not reality. And the example I always give is watching a Tarantino movie. And when I watch that ending scene in Django where they're in the house, I feel very cringy and it's hard for me to watch. If I was in that house, my emotions would be different. They would be like, 100 times more extreme. Yeah. That said, we're aware the metaverse is a fictional place. If we were in there, when I'm in an Oculus, I'm aware that I'm in a fictional place. Will I like to engage in a space where I can make myself look thinner or have better skin or younger? Yeah, that's why I'm on TikTok, right? I'm already doing that. So, I mean, we can talk about those impacts, and people always like to talk about, will there be a preference for virtual life? Well, we already see preferences for virtual lives in some ways. In games, we see it. Social media influencers, you can see it, and you can kind of postulate and talk about it there. Do I see it being any more extreme? Not really. I mean, we had these same discussions when we talked about Pong versus look what we have now. Look at the beautiful worlds. Look at Breath of the Wild. Look at the beautiful worlds we can create now in digital spaces. Are the impacts different? I would say no. Maybe it's more enjoyable because it's more beautiful. But, its impact on our psychological well-being hasn't really changed based on like graphics becoming more realistic.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, there were people that would pump every quarter into an arcade machine and end up with the claw, the Nintenditis, back when we had Pong or Froggers. But yeah, I found it. I'm actually really looking forward to that when you do kind of look into that, because it's an area that's kind of very much interested me in the past. In fact, there's a video on my YouTube called "I'm Not Ready Player One," which was about was basically about how we deal with everything by comparison, and the idea of beauty standards moved forward over time. And then once we can have the TikTok filters and stuff, like I don't have filters on me. I just have a really nice camera and good lighting. But when I put filters on me and then when you switch them off, I'm like, is that what I look like?
Oh my God.
It's like seriously, have I got that? I didn't notice my wrinkles. I didn't notice this little blotchy red thing on the end of my nose until all that got switched off. Exactly. And I do think it's quite interesting, the idea, like where it will all go in terms of like, you can be something completely different. And I've just literally last night started reading Ready Player 2 as well, which is this has already got me hooked, because I thought Ready Player 1 was great. And I do think that, it offers a more, it's this, I think I want to know what the underpinning concept is. Like, we will always do something that we will always kind of go towards the most attractive offer, maybe, like it's that. So have you seen the film Upgrade?
I have not.
Okay. Upgrade is like Venom with an AI instead of a symbiote. So basically, it's it combines with the person. It's got its own ideas, but there's a load of people that are just sat in virtual reality. He says, why do people stay in there like all this time? And the woman's response is, why would anybody want to wake up? It's like it's I think it's this sign as well, I suppose, that, like we talked about coping mechanism before, it's like, if we are going to these games for its coping mechanism, the game's not the problem, actually. The game's the solution. The fact that we've fact that we've got something we want to escape from is probably the problem.
Well, escapism is healthy generally. Well, yeah. I mean, unless you overdo it. We all need to escape, from our daily stresses. And this actually goes back to some of the things that you mentioned before about how books seem fine, but games don't. Play is important throughout the lifespan.
Yep.
And whether it's like imaginative play, which you can have, in your mind as you're reading books, or whether it's digital gameplay, it's important. It's important that we do that even as adults. And people see play as frivolous, and it is, and that's the point. And we don't have to be productive. We don't always have to be working our side hustle. We can just sit down and we can sit and we can have fun. So I forgot where I was going with that. But yeah. Oh, and I do want to say too, like, so this metaverse, like you're saying, like Ready Player One, I always say, is it really going to be a thing like San Junipero Black Mirror episode? Yeah. That's always where I go when we talk about the metaverse, right? Is it indistinguishable from reality? Because at the end of the day, like, now we still have to live in meat space. We still have to tend to our children. We still have to eat food. Like, we obviously can't spend our entire lives in a virtual space. And that's always the fear.
Not yet.
It's not yet. So when we get to that point, then we can have that conversation. I think I'll be long gone by then.
Well, that's that's actually, that's why I kind of want to go down this route. Is the question, you say, when we get to that point, we can have that conversation. And it's like, okay, now don't get me wrong. I personally love the idea of having something plugged into the back of my head and I can suddenly speak French or do Kung Fu or fly a helicopter. That was when I watched The Matrix the first time, like, everyone else is focusing on the dystopia. And I'm just like, give me that, jack all that knowledge right in there. But I suppose it's like a lot of the conversations, I feel like we whether rightly or wrongly, I feel like we as humans, we think we're more aware than we've ever been, and we think that we'd see things coming, and we think that we want to be ahead of things, and we're going to stop AI before it does this, and we're going to do all that because we've seen all the sci-fi films, and we're going to get ahead of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like to have these conversations. That's why Black Mirror is actually one of my favorite shows. And it's funny because when I watched Don't Look Up at New Year, and like I didn't like it, and people are like, why didn't you like it? I'm like, oh, it's just too real. And like, but you like Black Mirror, and that's like you like that because it's too real. And I'm like, yeah, but Don't Look Up was irritating, and it's like that was real about people and their inability to kind of pay attention to the important stuff when there's less important stuff just literally going across your newsfeed 100% of the time. So I think that's again, it's like why people do like to talk about these things beforehand, because we think that we think maybe foolishly we're going to stop the rising tide of the technology. We think that if we notice the perils and pitfalls that are going to come, but I think we can all probably sit down and agree. All of us sit down and agree on something. That sounds risky, but that technology is marching forward, and there's not a lot we can do about it, really. Which is why I say thank you to Siri. So when she takes over, she'll remember me as being mild-mannered. Is there any, with you basically being someone who's interested in both technology and a psychologist, is there anything happening in tech right now that you think is really promising from a psychology or from a mental health point of view?
I really like the way that virtual reality is being used in non-gaming ways. There's a lot of new initiatives to develop virtual reality for things like pain management. There's a really good charity called Child's Play, and they raise money to put technology in hospitals. So for like kids who are going through chemotherapy, for instance, and they don't want to give them narcotics, they're finding ways to use Oculus headsets and send them into these virtual spaces that can distract them enough that the pain of the procedures that they're going through is mitigated. I love to see new and novel uses of, entertainment technology. And that's probably what is exciting me the most at the moment.
Do you think, as a whole, we are becoming more or less social?
I would say more. If I had to pick a side, I would say neutral. But if I had to pick a side, I would say more. Even though, as I mentioned, we all look antisocial with our faces. But when I have my phone in my hand, I'm on Twitter or I'm on TikTok, and both of those are social in different ways. I think that we are more capable of being more connected to more people than ever before. And I think it's it's an amazing thing to live through. And I can connect with people in the UK, and I can connect with people in Germany, and I can connect with people I've never met before and learn about their lives and learn from their experiences. It's really kind of incredible. Whereas, before, I only, back in the day when I wasn't alive, when people lived on homesteads and farms, like you only knew your neighbors, right? Who else would you ever interact with or ever meet with if you didn't travel? So I guess I'd vote for more.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the options for how many people you can interact with now. I'm a big believer of the phrase your vibe attracts your tribe, and I feel like if you'd have lived in like a tiny little mining town in Wales, if you'd lived in a tiny little mining town in Wales, your people that like that vibe with you, there might have been like one other person in that whole town that was like on the same wavelength as you. And I feel like that this increases the possibility of us being able to find those people. Unfortunately, it also increases the possibility of, because of the noise of the internet and the noise of social media, increases the fact that to find this person, you're probably going to have to go through 7,000 other people that are exactly like the people.
That's true. I mean, I grew up in a very small town in Texas. I remember when we got the McDonald's. It was a big deal when the McDonald's came to my town. So yeah, and I didn't know another single girl who enjoyed video games until like after undergraduate degree. Like it was a long time. And now, like Take This has a Discord, which I call the most wholesome place on the internet. I can just hop on my phone and I have a tribe of men and women, people of all genders who love the same things that I do. And I can sit and I can have a chat with them. In my small town in Texas, I had my brother to talk to, but there wasn't like no women and just a few close friends who were all male. So yeah, it is kind of amazing the technology we have to find our people. And I'm not limited to the, 2,500 people that lived in my town. It was a small town.
Yeah. Is there anything that you're allowed to talk about that of your own upcoming work that you're particularly excited to get stuck into?
Ooh, yes, I'm giving a talk at GDC this year, which is the Game Developers Conference in March, about the landscape of extremist behavior in online games. So I talk a lot. People have actually accused me of being just like, I'm pro game and I only talk about positive things. I talk about the positive things to balance the narrative because we focus along on the negative. But there are negative things to consider, especially when we think about the social environment of online games. So I'm really excited to kind of explore that and talk about, ways in which games may be being leveraged for nefarious purposes that are not being particularly well regulated. So I'm excited about that. And then hopefully I'll be at PAX East at the end of April, COVID contingent. I'm really looking forward to seeing the community and going to an event. I haven't been to an event since PAX East 2020, right before event? COVID hit. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't even have them in England. So, well, we do. We have a few.
But you have England, Dave. I went to grad school in England. I went to the University of York for my PhD. I love England. Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's not.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, sorry. It's an hour and 15 from me. It's not far.
Where are you?
I'm in Lancashire, so the next county over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that being said, I am 45 minutes from where I was born, so I've not moved very far. So I'm from Liverpool originally. So.
Oh, are you? Yeah. That's exciting.
But my accent's quite subtle. My accent's quite subtle. But yes, we do have England. But the funny thing was this year they announced the dates for both. The TwitchCon America and TwitchCon Europe, and this year I've only got 2 trips booked, and because it's my 40th next month and it's my mum's 70th in October, and we couldn't really get anything for my 40th travel wise in February, so my 40th we're doing in July, which is when TwitchCon Europe's on, and the one for me mum, her birthday is in October, and that's when TwitchCon America's on. And I was like, no, I was going to do at least one of them this year because maybe you should do PAX East.
Where's end of April, Boston. It's always in Boston.
Okay, fair enough. And then it's when in April?
End of April.
End of April. Maybe.
Yeah. Think about it.
But the problem
is
I'm using all of my vacations for those vacations, though. So
vacation trumps work. I will say.
Well, it does. But yeah, my wife would be like, I'm going to Boston. I want to go to Boston.
Boston's lovely.
We actually had plans in 2020 originally to do the New England fall road trip.
Oh, see, look. Stars are aligning, Dave. I feel like
that's not fall. April's not fall. It's spring.
No, it's spring. The weather's nicer in spring.
I know, but it's not. It's the foliage. It's what you've got to go for. We're literally the trees look a little bit like me today.
Yes, no, they do. They look exactly like that. It's beautiful.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap this up?
No, just thank you for having me. And, if there's any message that gets taken away from this conversation, it should be that, games are not necessarily inherently negative things to engage with. And if we look at the research as a whole, it's generally more positive than negative. So let's, all play some more games, but maybe watch The Witcher first.
I'm working.
That breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah, I'll get another half. Tomorrow is one of the days that I'm at the gym, so it's.
Okay, good,
I used to be at the gym 4 times a week, which would have or 5 times a week, which would have basically got me through it a lot.
You'd
quicker.
Be through season 2 already.
I know, and I got through all of Ozark doing that, but I recently took Muay Thai kickboxing back up, so I now do that. I was doing that
cool.
1 day a week, and then I got hooked on that again. So that now
Very
is on
cool.
2 days a week. So originally it was like the gym plus that, and then it was like, why am I always so tired? so yes, sacrifices had to be made, but I'd made this rule that I was only going to watch certain shows whilst I was doing cardio. Other shows I'll watch it with my wife, or I'll watch with my kids, or I'll just sometimes watch on my own. But once a show goes into the I'm only allowed to watch this whilst doing cardio side of things, it's like a rule, and my brain's like, no, if you take this out and just bring it over here, because I've been wanting to start listening to audiobooks again more, and like my wife Alona yesterday was like, well, why don't you do them while you're doing your cardio? I'm like, because then I will never watch The Witcher. And she was like,
then Rachel won't talk to me anymore.
Well, that definitely would be that's all the motivation I need. Because yes, I would love to talk to you again about other subjects in the future. So now I will go and make sure I'm all up to date. Yeah. Maybe I'll just do that with season 1, and then season 2 is a completely different show, right? So therefore,
yes, it is really different, actually.
Maybe. Yeah. Cool. Is that where is the best place? You've already mentioned the Zeitgeist on YouTube and stuff, but where's the best place for people to find more about you on the internet?
I do have a website. It's rkowert.com, rkowert.com. I live on Twitter at Dr. Kowert. And YouTube. That's pretty much the trifecta. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about Take This and our mental health mission, you can go to takethis.org. And I'm also in the Discord there. As I said, I love that place. It's so lovely and wonderful, and everyone is kind. So if you're looking for a new Discord to join, highly recommend.
Amazing. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you.